Merci. Donc nous allons passer à la première table ronde.
Thank you. We will move to the first round table. I will ask Denis GUTHLEBEN to come and join me on stage because he will be the moderator. I'm sure that it will be a very animated discussion. One person could not be here. Philippe BRUYERRE, unfortunately, has to be excused because he's sick. He was supposed to talk about the wind power, but I'm calling all the other speakers on stage anyway. Osman, where are you? Osman BENCHIKH. He will speak first. Then there will be Marc JEDLICZKA, Christian de GROMARD, who's already here, Frédéric CAILLE, also joining us. And then, Denis, over to you.
Merci, merci. Alors, bonjour à tous.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Denis GUTHLEBEN. I'm the director, the deputy director of the History Committee of the CNRS. And I'm a science historian, and I'm very pleased to facilitate this session on the history of our commitment. Right. So when you talk about solar energy, of course, you have to look at the present and the future, which of course is good. And it is based on the climate urgency that we have to face. But this kind of energy only has a future because it also has a past. There's a very fertile soil on which we have started to work. Throughout the decades, you've seen that a lot of people were mobilized in that area, national, international, public and private, scientific and associations alike. There was a lot of innovation, there was a lot of enthusiasm, and we also had moments of doubt and things that we should not overlook, because I think that the downturns are also very instructive. Now, at the CNRS, the National Center for Research, we started right after the war. There were a few pioneers like Félix Tronc, for example, and others, and they realized that their highly theoretical work can have a very concrete and practical fallout. So they decided to explore all this, basing their work on new instruments such as the Odelio solar furnace, for example. They worked on very large-scale projects, involving the world of science, the world of politics. I'm thinking about PIRDES, which is a pluridisciplinary program of research for the development of solar energy. That was launched by CNRS in 1975, after the first oil crisis. So in this first session, we are going to look back at the roots of this history, and during the rest of the day we will see what came out of this and what we can do for the future. Of course, there will not be exhaustive presentations because we have a lot of speakers and not a lot of time. So we have decided that each panelist will have to say a few words about his role and then mention a few key ideas that we will then have a discussion about. And you will be able to dig a little deeper into that by reading their own work, which is available in many places. And since it's the 50th anniversary of this UNESCO Congress, the Sun at the Service of Mankind, and so we are going to start with UNESCO. Osman BENCHIKH, who used to be in charge of renewable energies at UNESCO. Osman, without further ado, you have the floor. I don't know if you want to stand at the rostrum or if you want to remain seated at the table. I think I'll just stay here. Good morning. I'm Osman BENCHIKH. In one of my previous lives, I was in charge of renewable energy programs at UNESCO. Before that, I was an academic. Right. So I think I'll stand, actually. I think it will be brief. I'll try to be concise because we don't have much time. And I want to pass on the information. So I will give you a certain number of figures, and you will receive the presentation in the proceedings, or you can contact me and I will send it to you. I will start with UNESCO. Why UNESCO? You know, usually you think that UNESCO is mostly related to culture, but it's absolutely not the case, because UNESCO is also involved in science. And we know that everything that is connected to technology is also related to science in general. So UNESCO, right after it was created in the 1940s, was interested in renewable energies. And one of the major programs of UNESCO at the time, right after it was founded, was renewables. And the program was called Zone Aride, arid areas. And when you talk about the development of arid areas, of course, you have to think about energy, which is a key factor for the development of those areas. And this was when the UNESCO organized a congress in 1952, the first World Congress that took place in New Delhi on renewable energy. It was really completely new at the time. And you know, we use the word sun at the service of mankind a lot. And so there was a discussion about renewable energy, solar energy, etc. So you always have to place things back in the context. When you look back to the 50s, renewable energy, I don't know if anybody knew what it meant, actually. But when you say sun, solar energy, solar power, of course, then this echoes in the people's minds. You know, it goes back to the Egyptians, because you know that the solar god was represented and was worshipped. So people knew that sun could be a source of energy. And at the time, it was a big conference in New Delhi, which recommended that UNESCO should organize an international conference right here in Paris. And the conference took place in 1973. The topic was renewable energy. And at the beginning, the Delhi Congress was much focused on wind and solar power, but the one in 1973, and I'm not going to go into the details because it's been mentioned already, was mostly more general. I think that there were more than 1,000 attendees. It was a great event that everybody talked about at the time. And it was a United Nations agency, so it really paved the way for renewable energies, even though it was not a priority topic at the time. Then, in 1993, so that's 20 years later, there was an experts meeting, high-level experts meeting. That's the time when I started to be involved in the process. And this experts meeting brought together experts from all over the world. And of course, we can talk about renewables among ourselves. That's all very nice, but it doesn't take us very far, right? So at the time, the experts got together to try to identify the problems, the potential solutions, the budget, also resources that were required to implement renewable energy sources. And also, and this I think is where it really clicked in the international community, what came out of this is that nobody's listening to us. You know, we get together quite well as experts and academics and scientists, but it's the politicians who actually make the decisions, and they were not interested, or they were not aware of the issues, or they did not even get the information. So after this high-level experts meeting, we decided to come up with a certain number of basic documents on renewable energy. And after that, we wanted to organize a political meeting for heads of state and government only dedicated to solar power. We did that back in 1996. It was not easy, let me tell you this much, because we did it. But in 96, there was this summit, I don't know how, maybe heads of state were there, but a lot, and all governments were represented. And we submitted the program that had been prepared. And this is where it all started, because that's when the politicians started to understand the stakes, and they understood that it was useful and necessary to think out of the box and to seriously address the question of renewables. And so it became a little bit more serious, because right after that, the states and governments took this thing and passed it on to the United Nations Secretary. And so there were a certain number of binding resolutions from the UN asking the states to implement a certain number of things on this solar energy program throughout the world. And then after that, there were resolutions and then more resolutions. And I think that from that moment onwards, renewable energy was actually taken into account at political level. Then in 1997, we started a program that was supposed to come along with the decisions. It was called the Global Solar Program. But in our mind, solar meant all forms of renewable energy. And this is where I'll stop. There was a program which, to me, was very interesting, because when you look at scientific research, education and training, this was also very much overlooked in the political decision. So we implemented a program related to education and training. And then one of the things that made me really happy is that in 2015, energy was actually part of Agenda 2030. It was the Sustainable Development Goals. And there was water, education, etc., and energy had been overlooked until then. And then it was included, and then this was the achievement of a dream for me. And then I could go back to reality. So thank you very much. Thank you. Osman said that it is absolutely necessary to bring together all the stakeholders. And Jean-Louis Ball, who's the chairman of Agir pour le Climat, which puts him really at the crossroads between all these stakeholders. Thank you. Yes, me again. Well, I'm not going to remind you of my role in that process, because I'm very humble, but I want to tell you what I witnessed. I started working in solar power at the beginning. It was thermal and then photovoltaic. So I started back in 1975. So I was probably influenced by this 1973 Congress. And my first achievement in photovoltaic power was carried out in Timbuktu, where I installed a solar pump, 1.5 kilowatts. So you might laugh at that, but at the time we would pump 100 cubic meters of water at a depth of 10 meters in order to irrigate a plant nursery in the suburbs of Timbuktu. The price was $20 per watt, which is a little less than the $100 that I was talking about before. And the market for photovoltaic power at the time was everything that was not connected to the grid. Telecoms, lighthouses, pumping stations, dispensaries and hospitals that were located in remote areas. And for about 10 years, the photovoltaic power industry lived off that type of markets. And then there was the revolution. That was during the course of the 1990s. It was the beginning of connections to grids in industrialized countries like Switzerland, Japan, and Germany mostly, as Wolfgang said earlier. The first program was 1,000 solar rooftops, 3 kilowatts per rooftop. So once again, you may laugh because the total would be 3 megawatts, right? But then it became 100,000 solar rooftops, That was a nice increase, and then we also saw the prices drop because there was a massive R&D program that was mostly carried out in Europe and also in the US and in Japan and partly in France. And I would like to pay a tribute to the French scientific community led by ADEME, the French Environment Agency, because they contributed very much to the development of photovoltaic power. And then something else that happened at the beginning of the 2000s was massive investment from Chinese industry. This has been mentioned by Wolfgang also. So you saw the evolution. On the left is the type of markets that we got at the end of the 1980s. You know, any location that was not connected to the grid. And then you have those big facilities which are totally connected to the grid. And you see the first one I did in Timbuktu was done with this photovoltaic module that experts know well. It was called BPX47A, 10.9 WC, manufactured by Radio Technique Québec, located in Caen in Normandy. And then it became photowatt. So you see, almost 11 watts per modules. Now we have modules which produce more than 500. And this is why we can have those big sites, big plants. The evolution was very spectacular in photovoltaic, but the leading country in solar power was Denmark. We had machines that could produce a few tens of kilowatts at the time, at the beginning, 500 kilowatts per machine back in 1990. And now these machines are up to 5 to 6 megawatts in the countries, of course, which authorize such power. For wind power, we started setting wind turbines on land and then offshore, where the masts are actually anchored on the seabed. The first of those were installed in Sweden, in the Bay of Copenhagen, with 2 megawatts at the time, which was already a lot at the time. And now the new facilities can produce between 12 and 14 megawatts. And this progress was made possible thanks to the technological innovations, especially the materials for the wind turbines. Now the blades can be more than 100 meters long. And also for wind power at sea, you have a different kind of alternators that actually manage to decrease the weight at the top of the masts. And this is really the way to go, to have more and more powerful machines. And we also had support from the European Commission, support to R&D, which made this technological progress possible. And now we have floating wind turbines, and this is really going to set wind power free from the constraint of having to be embedded on the seabed. And now you can see the forecast here from the Energy Agency. That's only wind and solar. You don't have hydropower. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, hydropower is included there. You see the evolution for this year. It will be largely surpassed. Renewable for wind and solar is today at 12% of the global power generation in the world. And since it is growing, According to Amber, which is a British consulting firm, in 2023, we should see a decline in fossil fuels at long last. And it means that we won the battle of cost. Just to give you a number, European consumers have saved 100 billion euros between 2021 and 2023, thanks to the new installations that were made in Europe over that two-year period. Now, in 2004, we needed 1 year to have 1 gigawatt of installed power. In 2010, it was 1 month. And in 2016, it was 1 week. And as you heard the numbers today, it takes less than 1 day to install 1 gigawatt of power. And the idea is that we have to continue working on research and development, especially for industrial competition. If we want to re-industrialize photovoltaic power in Europe, we need to have state-of-the-art technology, and also we need to keep on working on integrating this into the grids. And it is something, of course, that is going to become more and more important as we continue to work on the development of photovoltaic power and renewable energy at large. Yes, solar power is a fairly recent initiative, but it actually started a little bit earlier than that. We are going to look back on history. Frédéric published a book a few months ago, a book on Augustin Mouchot. It's a very, very interesting book that I recommend you to buy and read.
Bien, bonjour, je suis Frédéric.
Good morning. My name is Frédéric CAILLE, researcher in political science. I've been working on solar power for the last 10 years. I wanted to talk about the intellectual and human story, the story of men, women, of pioneers, the project of a human society that would respect the planet with this infinite and free energy, which is the sun. And I wanted the public to understand that the development of solar energy and renewable energies is not just technology. It's a question of political and social choices, cultural choices, because we are citizens. We are the subjects of fossil fuels, whether we know it or not, as written by Dominique Boyer, Imre Zesman, when we talked about energy humanities. We belong to a world and to a modern civilization that is totally built and irrigated right to the core with fossil fuels and the crazy energy dissipation that characterizes them. Working on solar energy means mentally, intellectually deconstructing this petro and carbo civilization, and we all know that it is urgent to come out of it. There are energy alternatives. They exist since a long time. But the use of fossil fuels is so easy to use, and we know the climate consequences and the full potential of flow energies like solar energy, the winds, the movement of the seas, the natural temperature gradients. To understand that means that we can act. And to divert ourselves from fossil fuels does not mean going back in the past for humanity. It is in civil society, in teaching, in art, in the imagination, and in technological innovation that the forces will emerge that will take us around this turning point. This is the greatest moment of awareness, of scientific and practical proof globally of the potential of the sun. If you look at the communications that are on open access on the site of the UNESCO, you will see that our current questions are already present then. the resilient cities because of heat and the cost of energy, thermodynamics, solar distillation, self-consumption, the issues for the emergence of the southern countries, the drop of the costs in the photovoltaic, etc., etc. But this moment in 1973 has deeper roots. This is a picture of the patent of Abel Pifre on behalf of the company he created on the 30th of March and 15th of September 1983. This is the first technical projection of a solar plant with a reflection on the adaptability in terms of construction, the wind effect, and the increase in temperature with the enlargement in size. Pifre is planning for large volumes for distillation, heating, high pressure for steam, and this is the first industrialization of solar energy. And this is the next step of the experiments and patents of Augustin Mouchot. He's the first one to demonstrate in the 70s that it was possible to use solar energy as a source of primary energy for all the industrial processes, whatever they were. That was possible to cook, to distill, to have interesting domestic appliances. Mouchot is just a professor, but he's a precursor. He's at the vanguard. He's supported by the Ministry of Public Affairs, and he will rein himself to build his solar motor for the Universal Exhibition of 1868. He used a steam engine of 1 kilowatt. He made ice with a compressor. He used solar distillators. He announced the production of electricity with solar cells. He announced solar hydrolysis through the photolysis of water. And he's going to intellectually invent, from the Latin invenere, meet and find solar energy. It has great influence. He talks about the telephone phonograph, transportation of the voice, the recording of sound, which were the other innovations of the 78 Global Fair. And we required several years and archives to give a real dimension to this innovator. And we said that he was just a crazy-headed inventor. And thank you for Lanco for telling us that Auguste Mouchot really inspired us in the following century, in spite of a very partial report. A report announcing, says Daniel Lanco, the anti-solar frenzy and the detractors of this free and clean energy. In 1973, a lot of participants at the Congress know Augustin Mouchot, and a large number, with all the difficulties in the development of southern countries, want to repair 100 years later the omission of his work, especially for the sunniest regions of the planet. This page of the Courrier de l'UNESCO 1974 summarizes all the expectations and hopes. And here we see three precursors of solar energy, whom I'd like to mention very rapidly to conclude. The first is the Nigerian professor Abdul Munyumi Usu, who will make 3 communications in 1972. And since his thesis, he was a founder in 1974. He was a fervent defender of solar energy that was be developed in Africa and for Africa. The solar water heaters that he'll develop in a small plant, they still work, and the University of Niamey carries his name. The second person is Jean-Pierre Girardier. In 1973, he installed one of the rare high-performance solar motors that was developed since Mouchot's work. Jean-Pierre Girardier will tell me several times, if you write our story, you'll have to begin with Augustin Mouchot. In the 7 years following, his small company will build the 2 most powerful plants, solar electric plants in the world. It was acquired by the Atomic Energy Commission, and then it will disappear at the same time with the industrialization of solar industry. That was the hope of all the participants in 1973. So, 100 years, almost on the same day, we have the same story of Mouchot and Pifre, the end of a moment, the end of a window of opportunity for a whole sector of thermodynamism and solar energy. And the partisans of other modes of conversion of solar energy that would be more interesting for the northern countries like photovoltaic, and they have decided that it would be so. Alexandre Mouton talks about all this in his thesis, supported recently in June 2023. And what remains, and this is mentioned by the drawings, the two architects of Socrates, Anne-Marie and George Alexandrov, teachers in Beaux-Arts and then at the architecture school in Paris, French pioneers in energy and bioclimatic architecture. The solar village in Sahara, this is the end of the study of Georges Alexandrov in 1968, and the many facilities, residences, hospitals, agricultural cooperatives. At the end of the 18th century, you see that this development is based on solar before the genius advances of photovoltaic. Now, to summarize, 150 years after Augustin Mouchot, and the bicentennial of his birth will be in 2025, 50 years after 1973, we can only assert, in front of the work of all the pioneers and all the emergencies that are ours, that solar energy is more than ever the future of humanity. We are all here to contribute to that and to believe in this. Thank you.
Alors l'histoire du solaire, on va...
So the history of solar energy, it's a question of commitments, as you can see with the personalities mentioned by Frédéric. So we're going to remain in the field of engagement. You are the spokesperson of Negawatt, and you are in charge of Hespul with some 30 employees who are experts in renewable energy. I will not say more. I will give you the floor immediately so that we can stick to the time.
Non, c'est bon. Alors d'abord, je...
So first, I'd like to thank Daniel Lanco for this symposium because it's my birthday. So I'm not going to tell you my age, but if I tell you that I landed in photovoltaic when I was a kid, in 73 I was still in college, and Riser for me is something that's very dear to me. I followed his line, including in this revolution in society. I went on strikes. I'm not a researcher, I'm just a finder. And that's the whole story of the solar energy. So you heard the discourse, the speech of the minister, and she talked about solar and civil nuclear. And she's not wrong. What is solar? It is a thermonuclear reactor. Bernard Chameau would talk about fusion. So for thousands of years we had that, and it will still work for thousands of years. What she didn't understand is that he lost from the technical, economic point of view, from the point of risk, costs, etc. So there are things that percolated in the news that need to be underlined. I'll let people from art, researchers, from the scientific point of view of this term, the players, the major players. I'm a very small player, a very modest player. But there are two things that are essential in this progress. I'm only talking about photovoltaic, solar, thermal. I have that in my home since a long time. I have no problem with that. But globally speaking, it is the solar, photovoltaic, and wind farms that will help us in terms of electricity. Electricity is going to be a major vector. I think we all agree on that. And beyond the scientific aspects and technical aspects, there are two elements that have allowed us to have this revolution that will bring us back to the sources of humanity. We all come from the sun. Oil, gas, coal, it's a way of storing biomass, it's photosynthesis, that's the engine of humanity in its broad lines, and it's the reason why there is humanity on Earth. And from the technological point of view, we could connect photovoltaic to the grid. I am in a house that is still not connected to the grid. And I know what it is. I have no problems with that. But the discovery of electronics at the end of the 80s in Switzerland or in Germany, this really allowed us to have a leap. And at the time, it allowed us to connect the PV in continuous with the alternative system to be compatible with the electric grid. Now, this is the work of the RTE at the end of 2021. This is what allows us to have renewable, 100% renewable electrical systems. So we know the technical systems, but this power can reproduce inertia in a synthetic way, inertia that is given by large alternatives thanks to the nuclear energy or hydraulics. So this is a technological revolution. The first inverter in France, it was in 1992, and we just had this vision that we could connect, that we could have photovoltaic in the network, in the grid, but now we go much faster. This is a technology that has a major importance in the future of the global energy system. So that's the technical aspect. And the poetic one is that these are people who had the vision. Razor had a political vision of all this, but after him there were people who set up political instruments, and these are the purchasing tariffs. I'd like to mention a few people in this area. Jimmy Carter in 1978, who had an American law to have premium for the energy produced. This was imagined by the Danes, Previn Merits. He's a Dane who had this idea at the end of the 80s to do that for wind in Denmark. His friend Hermann Scher pinched his idea, and since he was a politician in Germany, he was the rapporteur at the Bundestag in Germany. He created the EEG law in Germany that allowed the soaring of this thanks to this purchasing tariffs. And in France, there are two people I'd like to mention: Bernard Chameau, who had this wonderful idea to transpose, and Yves Cochet, who was the Minister of Environment at the time and who signed the 2000 Act to introduce this. The French law preceded by 2 months the German law on the purchasing tariff. And it's at the end of March in Germany. And this allowed the industrial taking off. This allowed to cut costs. And this allows us to say today that we have real solutions regarding climate change, regarding this issue of resources, this shifting of this energy system. It's these two elements, the technical power. Of course, solar was there, but I'm talking about all that supported it, the political vision and this purchasing tariff strategy. In 20 years, I mean, students will still look at this incredible progress in solar and wind energy thanks to one instrument that allowed this massification, this drop in prices. And we can talk about this seriously, whether it's in Dubai or elsewhere. It's part of the solutions. They're not the only solutions. We have to bring down our consumption. Of course, that is obvious. But for us and for developed countries today, and this is really reassuring, we have the responses. Now we have to convince our leaders, and I must say that what's happening right now in the nuclear area in France, it's really creating a lot of concern. We're going to lose a lot of money, a lot of time. We're not going to go to what is core. We will end up in a deadlock, and it is a pity. It's a pity for the country that discovered PV, whose Becquerel. It's a real pity, and I will not say any more. Thank you. I was talking about an engagement. We were not disappointed, and the minister wasn't either. The program was announcing 2 more speakers. Philippe Bruyerre is ill, so he will not be able to come. So we wish him to get well soon. And now there's Christian. Christian will begin with your story. So the history of renewable energies began in 1980 in India, in the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and it continued last year. I retired from the AFD, the French Development Agency, where I was the energy referent. So renewable energies for me, these are the renewable energies in the South, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. Now, I suggest to go very fast because time is ticking. I've looked at the past. The 70s were very rich in very structuring books. I've mentioned a few. The first one, which was fundamental for me, from Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. This is absolutely true. He's the pioneer of soft technologies, and this is what made me go to India to see what was happening there. I've mentioned some others. They are still very topical. You must read them. Utopia or Death, Entropy, Ecology, Economy. I really recommend these books to you. They're very relevant. The other books that are not so well known, but they were determining with one person who passed away 2 years ago, Jacques Géry, who wrote Renewable Energies in Developing Countries. We see photovoltaic panels and wind turbine, which is a bit oldish, but this was a determining period. And the other, The Servitudes of Power. This is a very interesting book, and they aren't published or edited anymore. Now, I suggest we take a quick overlook on what I call energy and, unfortunately, oil, which is still disturbing the economy. So 4 years, in the 70s until 86, here we had the ramping up of the control of energy. It's very difficult to translate that in English, and this is what we call the energy transition. It's a period of intellectual booming. And then there were 15 years of energy amnesia after the oil crisis. I am a person who was a climato-sceptic, energy to be sold, and we've remained with that profile. Then you have the emerging countries that are weighing, that are coming in, and that are beginning to consume. Until now, it was the North, and now the South is also consuming, India, China, Brazil, and we have this tension on prices and the increase in prices. We have barrels at more than $100. And then you have a zone of turbulence. We haven't come out of it. Turbulence related to the gas, shale, gases. How to come out of this destructuring yo-yo? This is the topical issue. And the COP is not at the top of all this. Now, the stabilizing point was really interesting. It is what we've said, the drop in prices of the photovoltaic. It was quite staggering, and it is continuing, and it is a real revolution. Photovoltaic is a revolution for the first time. It is a static electricity. You don't have these rotating machines anymore. It is modular. You can have small machines, and it is a revolution, as said in physics, and the economy is such that we have gone under the price of the nuclear power and fossil fuels. I'd like to end with two recommendations, two verticals that are very important. If we want to change energy, we have to first begin by changing our semantics. Now, the first thing I wanted to show with these cubes is that we keep talking about renewable and decarbonized. Decarbonization is not a very good term. In this room there, we have 2 tons of live carbon. So whatever is living is carbon. What we need to understand is that we have renewable energy, and in renewable we have everything. We have sun, 8,000, 10,000 times a year of what we consume. Hydraulics, wind, we have all kinds of resources. But the real question is recharging. How do we recharge? We have batteries, chemical batteries that we can use, hydraulic batteries, and there's a major issue not to use dams that empty out when there's water and that fill in when it rains, to use that as a battery. You don't have to be a great engineer to say that you have to use sun in the day and hydraulic at night. But that's not what is done in the world today. And the last thing, which is very important, which is very badly judged, is the energy biomass, which is an organic battery that gives carbon when it grows. And if we we develop these organic batteries, well, with the point on the use, it is something that is doable. Then we have depletable energies. If you take uranium, oil and gas, you have some 50 years of availability. Carbon, coal, there's more, but it emits a lot more CO2. So on the one hand, you have what cannot be depleted, and on the other hand, what can be depleted. And so the whole issue, sorry, I've gone too far. So the other issue, I'm going back to this starting point, small is beautiful. When you look at the electric grids in the world, you have 4 types of grids, and the problem is that, as a friend of mine was saying, when mega and micro are in a boat, it's micro that falls into the water. So therefore, we are really focusing on the giga networks, the giga European grids, that is 1 terawatt. The American, Russian, Chinese grids, they are highly interconnected, and interconnection allows us to regulate. There are a lot of networks in Africa, in the islands, which are made up of islands that are not connected. And these grids, these networks are gigawatts. Chad, 500 megawatts, Côte d'Ivoire, 1.5 gigawatts. So there's a ratio of 1 to 1,000, and that's really different, and we have to deal with that differently. And those small grids can be solarized much more rapidly thanks to the progress of electronics, of artificial intelligence, and photovoltaic. And then you have all the rest, what is outside of the grids, and it's not at all the same thing. Either you have mini grids or you have the e-grids, immaterial I-grids, immaterial grids that we need to develop, and 1 billion people are interested in those. So the problem is to stop analyzing electricity as being a large network, a large grid. And that's the problem with our conventional electricians, not to mention our national one here in France that only work within a certain framework. So these are a few historical ideas, and I'd like to thank Daniel for having invited me today. And at the AFD, we will try to talk on behalf of the southern countries, and they weigh as much as the northern countries in this development. Thank you.